Ethan Clark adjusted the collar of his trench coat, the worn fabric offering little comfort against the biting wind. Rain lashed against the pavement, each drop exploding in miniature bursts. The neon lights of the city were blurred by the downpour, casting an eerie glow over the slick streets. In the distance, sirens wailed, their cries swallowed by the relentless rain. It was the kind of night where the city's underbelly oozed onto the surface, where shadows danced with secrets and danger lurked around every corner. It had been 3 years since he'd walked these streets as a hunter, not as prey. 3 years since his world had fractured, collapsing inward with the force of a bomb. He'd retreated into the shadows then, letting the darkness envelop him. But now, pulled back into the light by the relentless grip of duty and the desperate call of his friend, he found himself standing at the precipice of a new hunt, a hunt that might lead him either to redemption or ruin. Behind him, the warm glow of the precinct contrasted sharply with the cold reality of the night. He stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the familiar yet alien landscape, trying to reconcile the past with the present. The building seemed both welcoming and forbidding, a fortress of law and order, but also the place where his own story had gone off the rails, where trust had curdled into betrayal and justice had become a distant memory. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed open the door and stepped inside. The precinct buzzed with activity, a hive of urgency and hushed voices. As he moved through the crowded space, eyes followed him, whispers trailing in his wake. Some were curious, some wary, some outright hostile. He could feel their stares burning into him, dissecting his every move. At the homicide desk, Sergeant Miller, his face weathered like an old leather glove, regarded him with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Clark," he said, his voice gruff, a hint of recognition struggling to break through the years. "Thought you were enjoying your retirement." "Just back in town," Ethan said, his voice rough from disuse, a stranger to the sound of his own voice. Miller grunted, not bothering to hide the skepticism in his tone. "So Vasquez sends word that you're here, and suddenly we have coffee and donuts. What are you playing at?" "I told her I'd help her out," Ethan replied, meeting the sergeant's gaze directly. "Right," Miller said, a sardonic edge to his voice. "Because that's what friends do. Come to save the day, after you've run off and left them holding the bag. We have a killer on our hands, Miller, and I won't stand by and watch you bleed resources trying to catch him. We need to talk." Miller leaned back, steepled his fingers and scrutinized him. "Let me get it straight. After 3 years of blissful ignorance, you show up because your buddy asks you to and you think you can tell us how to do our jobs." "No, I don't think that," Ethan said quietly, but with conviction. "But I do know this killer. I know his style. I know his mindset." Miller scoffed, unconvinced. "Sure you do, champ. Well, why don't you start by telling me what you know, since you're the expert?" As the others filed out, leaving Ethan alone with the sergeant, he could feel the weight of their doubts pressing down on him. But he wasn't here to win their trust or understanding. He was here to do a job. "Let's start with the first victim, Victor Santoro," Ethan said, pulling up a chair. "Crime lord, drug dealer, human trafficker. You could fill a library with Santoro's sins." "Yeah, well, most of those sins were conveniently buried in the statute of limitations," Miller grumbled, "which is why he was untouchable. Until now." "Exactly," Ethan said, leaning forward. "But why him? What did Santoro know? Or more importantly, what did he have that someone wanted?" Miller stared at him for a long moment, his face impassive. "You know, I hate playing 20 questions with smart Alex, but fine. Santoro wasn't just a criminal, he was a loose cannon. He dealt with people we didn't want dealing with. He had ties to other cities, other organizations. He was a liability. Then who benefits from him being dead? Who wants a war?" "Nobody wants a war," Miller snapped. "And you of all people know that, which is why I think you're wasting your time here. Santoro was eliminated for the greater good. Case closed." "Nothing's ever closed, Miller," Ethan said quietly, but with unwavering conviction. "Not really." He rose from the chair, his gaze boring into the sergeant's. "If you won't let me help, then get out of my way. I'll find him myself." Miller watched him go, his face unreadable. As Ethan moved through the precinct, the whispers followed him like a shadow. He ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. He needed to find the killer, not just for the sake of justice, but for himself. This hunt was personal now, a reckoning from the past that refused to stay buried. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and glistening in the neon light. The air was heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and distant smoke. Ethan pulled his coat tighter against the chill, bracing himself for the night ahead. He didn't know who he was hunting, but he knew one thing: this was a game of cat and mouse, and the hunter had just become the hunted again. Maria Vasquez waited for him outside, her silhouette framed by the light of the street lamp. Her expression was grim as she met his gaze. "Miller wasn't much help, was he?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the frustration she felt. "He doesn't believe me," Ethan replied, meeting her gaze. "He thinks I'm chasing ghosts." "He does that to everyone," Maria said with a tired sigh. "But you're not here for him, you're here for me." Ethan smiled faintly. "Actually, I'm here for the killer." "Same difference," she said, her lips twisting into a wry smile. "So where do we start?" "With the victims," Ethan said, his gaze fixed on the dark street ahead. "Whoever's doing this isn't just killing crime lords, they're targeting those who work for them, associates, even families." "We know that," Maria replied, "but we don't know why. The obvious answers don't fit. Revenge, extortion, they don't make sense." "Then we have to think like our killer," Ethan said, turning to her, his eyes blazing with intensity. "They're eliminating all traces. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no connection to previous cases. They're methodical, careful, surgical even. They're not just killing these people, they're making an example of them." "Why?" Maria pressed, searching his face for an answer. "To send a message," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Me." Maria's eyes widened in realization. "You think this is about you?" "I know it is," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. "I know who's behind this, and I'm going to bring them down." Maria reached out, her hand hovering over his arm before dropping back to her side. She knew what this meant, what this hunt would cost him, but she also knew there was no stopping him now. He was a force of nature, unleashed and unstoppable. As they moved further into the labyrinth of the city, the rain began again, soft at first, then relentless, washing away the boundaries between hunter and hunted, blurring the lines between darkness and light. In the heart of the storm, Ethan Clark walked on, his silhouette a stark figure against the blinding rain, his face set with grim determination, his eyes locked on the elusive killer who danced just out of sight. The game was on, and there would be no quarter asked and none given.